In a recent podcast, Kim Brand from CMS states they disburse $1 billion a day in claims. What could possibly go wrong? Today, a look at fraud prevention in the federal government. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy. We are recording this at the SAS Innovate DC conference. And we are recording this in case you didn't get a chance to come down here and participate in all the excitement. Part of the excitement was Stu Bradley. He must have spent 3 hours up the stage this morning. He hit every single topic in the world, but the topic we're going to focus on is government fraud and prevention with AI. Great sessions this morning, weren't they, Stu?
It was fantastic. They made me work hard for my lunch.
Good. Now we got to talk about the fraudsters. So there's fraudsters everywhere. So you mentioned something earlier that I wrote down. And you said fraudsters are now innovating faster than government systems can respond. I mean, so this is a whack-a-mole game, or how do you keep up?
Well, John, first, thanks for having me. Very happy to be here and continuing the dialogue. But it's a big problem, simply stated. When you think about the organized criminal enterprises that are out there that have, frankly, near unlimited budgets, they're not encumbered by governance or audit or initiatives for trustworthy innovation. They can take the latest technologies and innovate very, very quickly. And that's exactly why organizations, whether they're government entities or commercial entities, are having a hard time keeping up. What we're doing is working with these organizations to, not only set the guardrails around how they can innovate faster, but ensure that they've got the right approach and right technology to help drive that innovation.
Well, we're right in the middle of downtown D.C. We can walk out the door, go to a coffee shop, and maybe meet with some federal leaders. When they think about fraud prevention, is it a trust issue? Is it a budget issue? What is the issue for the federal leaders in town here?
Well, I think there's a multitude of different issues that are there. I think it starts with the strategy, right? The strategy of civilian organizations have always been to deliver the mission. And when you think about delivering the mission as the priority, they don't want to get in the way of distributing benefits or distributing refunds from a tax perspective because they want that money back into the economy. And so it's, unfortunately at times when they think about fraud prevention, there's a general nervousness that by having more robust fraud prevention capabilities, it's going to get in the way of serving the mission. And actually, it's really a false perspective, because if you actually do a better job of making decisions for fraud or for how you distribute benefits or how you are processing your tax returns, it allows you to actually deliver to that mission better, more accurately, and more efficiently while you are preventing fraud. Because when you think about ingesting the data that allows you to make these decisions, you can actually handle both that fraud prevention and delivering to the mission at the same time.
Some people may say, well, what kind of experience does SAS have in doing this? And you answered the question this morning. I was sitting there taking notes, and then Stu made the statement. He said, SAS is involved in the commercial world. We've been doing this for 50 years. In fact, they regulate 300 billion transactions, and they save 500 million in fraud. That's big numbers, isn't it?
Well, and that's just in financial institutions when you think about credit card and payment fraud. And when you think about the biggest fraud problems that we face as a society are within our government programs. We're saving billions of dollars on a global basis with government programs. And in fact, with different state tax agencies every year, we're saving, for some, $500, $900 million on an annual basis.
You also said something this morning that I wrote down, and it's just 3 small words. You said it's important to listen to customers. So when you listen to federal customers, what do you hear about fraud?
A lot of my customers, they approach me with questions like, gee, Stu, you have a chance to, travel across the globe and, meet with different government, agencies. What should we be on the lookout for next? And so that usually, starts the dialogue of, some of the cyber threats that we see out there, how AI-driven fraud is on the rise. But the conversation ends with that actually not being the right question to ask. So if you're always asking about what do I need to be on the lookout for next, right? You're always going to be, to your point, trying to whack-a-mole. You're always going to be chasing that next fraud scheme that is out there. The question that organizations should be asking is, what do I need to do to be ready for whatever comes next? And that comes down to agility. Now, when you look at the IT landscape, IT is absolutely proliferated beyond control. And government organizations, commercial entities have major IT rationalization initiatives that are underway. And so in order to be agile and be ready for whatever's next, organizations need to think differently around how they're harnessing their data, how they're establishing common architectures to make better decisions, and how they're establishing those guardrails for innovation, inclusive of AI innovation. And once they can do that, then they can start to streamline their innovation and ultimately their effectiveness and agility to be able to prevent fraud more effectively.
A wise man named Alan Weber once said that when you consider AI, you really have to start with governance. That's really the most effective way to use it, was governance. Now, we're sitting here in the District of Columbia, there's all kinds of agencies, there's plenty of governance. And so we have a federal agency that's got a lot of governance, introducing AI. Is this a new type of governance, or what are we talking about here? We have plenty of governance here, all kinds of acronyms.
Yeah, I think what Alan was referring to was, when you look inwardly as an organization, so take any civilian agency, as an example, they need to be looking inward around how they can govern their innovation. And that's the type of governance that Alan was referring to. One of the biggest risks that we often talk about with artificial intelligence, is, well, if we're leveraging this to help, automate and make decisions on behalf of humans, then we need to ensure that the decisions that are being made don't have unintended downstream consequences as one of the biggest risks. And in order to ensure that that governance is where it needs to be, it really needs to extend across the entirety of the data and AI lifecycle. So you need to start with your data, make sure that it's timely, it's complete, it's of the right quality. You need to establish governance around how you build and manage and deploy your models. And then ultimately, once they're providing production value for you, you need to ensure that the outcomes are what you're expecting. And all of that needs to be done up front before you're deploying capabilities into production. And if you can get the governance piece right and foundational for your organization, it's going to help streamline innovation. In fact, with IDC, with the firm that Alan works with, we did a survey last year. And one of the things that stood out to me most in that survey was those organizations that took governance seriously, that had trustworthy innovation initiatives within their organization, they were 60% more likely to generate double or more the return on their AI initiatives than other organizations. So it's not just a theory. We're seeing it play out in the data. And executives that use this as a driver for innovations are the ones that are going to be most successful.
Case studies are always interesting when you look at fraud. And a case study you mentioned this morning was Snap. And now, from my perspective, there are people who are legitimate and they should continue receiving their benefits of Snap. So how do you separate the good from the bad on this? This is a tough balancing act, isn't it? You want to reduce fraud, but you want to ensure that people who have valid claims get those fulfilled. This is the juggle here, isn't it?
So you're exactly right, and it hits on a really, really key topic, going back to the mission statement of these organizations, and supplemental nutrition is a great example of that. And so if you're thinking differently around how you're making decisions, you think about it from the fraud lens, and the common misnomer is that, hey, if we insert fraud detection into the eligibility or the benefits distribution process, then we're going to slow up the system. And those that are in great need of these benefits aren't going to get them on a timely manner. And that's the part that's false. Because if you do this right and you're making a decision on every person that applies for eligibility or every claim for benefits, you have the ability to streamline the provision of those benefits. You have the ability to be more confident in the, what I would call the positive decisions that you're making to get the needed benefits in the hands of those individuals in need more quickly with greater confidence. At the same time, what that's doing is it's flagging those that are much higher risk. And this is a very, very small percentage of the events that are coming through systems like this. And since it's such a small percentage, you can then further investigate that small percentage and save millions of dollars out of these programs. And that millions of dollars in savings actually goes to fund more benefits for those who need them.
We were interviewing one of your colleagues, Caroline, earlier, and she mentioned Georgia Pacific. And really, in 50 years, the depth of experience you have in the commercial world is just, it's banking, healthcare, Georgia, trees. I mean, it's really amazing. So what about lessons learned? You know, consultants like to say lessons learned. So what lessons have you learned in banking, healthcare, and insurance that might be applicable to applying analytics and AI to the federal government?
So I think one of the greatest learnings that the federal government can take from commercial industry is the knowledge sharing. And when you're looking to combat issues like fraud, it's not an institutional issue. It's, frankly, not even an industry issue. It's a societal issue. And when you take it from that perspective, one institution alone can't do as effective of a job at preventing fraud as the institutions when they band together. And so when you look at how financial institutions are helping prevent fraud at an industry level, they're sharing data and information that allows them to understand the fraud schemes that are out there, that allows them to understand details of the bad actors that are attacking multiple institutions. Insurance companies, for example, are sharing data and information around fraudulent claimants and fraudulent policyholders. The government can take that as a key critical lesson around being able to appropriately share more data across programs, because the bad actors know that government entities are operating in silos, and those same criminal enterprises are attacking a multitude of different programs to really increase the amount of fraud losses that are there across the government. The other big thing that they can do is they can take a page out of the book of the commercial entities who are rationalizing their IT investments. They are deploying consistent decisioning architectures such that they can better share data, they can better establish governance principles, and they can ultimately make better, more informed, and faster decisions, and whether that's to prevent certain types of risks, fraud, address anti-money laundering and sanctions obligations on that same infrastructure. It's helping them be more cost effective, but also helping them prevent broader risks through that process.
Earlier you mentioned an IDC study, so I got to mention one too. I mean, it's only fair here.
I love it.
And the number I want to use is 46%. And this is what Alan Weber talked about this morning. He said the ID survey shows that in implementing AI, trust is the real dilemma. So my question to you is that the differentiator? Is trustworthy AI, is that the real differentiator today between what systems to partner with or companies to work with?
In a short word, absolutely. I don't think, and this is coming from the vendor community, someone that comes from the vendor community, I don't think the vendor community is doing public sector or the private sector justice with all of the hype that they're creating around these new technologies. And there's good, don't get me wrong, there is good reason for the hype because these technologies can be absolutely transformational. But when innovation happens without the appropriate guardrails, you run the risk of breaking the trust of the customer or the citizen, and that could have just a deep and lasting, effect. And so, going back to the statistic around those that have deployed trustworthy innovation initiatives and getting bigger returns on their investment, I think that data point tells the story that those that are taking trust seriously and using it as a differentiator in their program to drive better and more streamlined innovation are ultimately going to be the winners in the long term.
Now, Stu, I read the newspaper, I read the stories, and it looks like, from 40,000 feet, people saw these new frontier models and jumped in, and then they started having some data pulled from them that they didn't want revealed, and so they pulling back. And the whole idea of privacy is difficult. There's a guy named Alex Karp, and everyone knows him in this town, and he famously said that privacy with AI is fragile. And maybe that's why the trust is a problem. So, it looks like SaaS has got this experience of decades working in banking and finance and all kinds of things, that privacy has to be in the top of the list.
Look, privacy is a very, very important initiative. And one of the things that we found is that when you think about the individuals, there's data that points to individuals wanting to be part of the solution. They want to partner with government agencies. They want to partner with commercial entities to help be part of the fraud prevention and the security process. Some interesting statistics we ran, this is, maybe 18 months ago, we did a survey with the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and we're refreshing, that survey. And 7 out of 10 individuals that were surveyed said that they're actually willing to share more of their personal information with an organization if that information is being used to help prevent fraud or increase their security. And so, privacy is really important, but I think organizations need to think differently around partnering with their consumers or citizens, being more transparent, as we talked about today, with their customers or citizens around bringing them in to be part of that security and fraud prevention journey.
Well, we're looking at football season, so we got to talk about the Chicago Bears.
Please, let's go.
There used to be a player for the Chicago Bears. He was 300 pounds, and he could stand on the ground and jump up on top of a table. He was very, very strong and very, very agile, and he was fast as well. And so the NFL looks for really fast people who are agile and quick. But SaaS and the federal government looks for AI that is, guess what? Fast and trustworthy. And so how do you balance that? They want the latest and greatest of AI, and they want it tomorrow, and you have this balance with compliance and trust. And so the balance is the hardest part of this whole solution, I think.
And John, look, I would absolutely agree with you. I think striking that balance is absolutely appropriate. And those organizations that are doing it correct, that are setting up the guardrails, that are setting up the right technical infrastructure, are the ones that can actually strike that balance. Right? Because when you want trust, you need to ensure that it's aligned to a common process. If you want to be able to leverage the great innovations that are occurring out there in the marketplace, you need to have that common foundational work that has been done so you can tap into those innovations. If you are consistently tapping into those innovations without that infrastructure in place, ultimately those innovations will fail at enterprise scale. And the federal government, the state and local government, and commercial entities at large need capabilities that are going to scale. And you mentioned us being in the trust business from a SaaS perspective. That's part of the reason why we've been around for 50 years and are planning. We're planning for what SaaS looks like for the next 50. And one of the foundational things that we're taking from that culture is being one of the most trustworthy partners and being that trustworthy AI and innovation partner for our customers.
Stu, we're in downtown Washington, D.C. I'm sure we could walk out the front door and walk into a federal agency. Someone puts you in the seat of a federal CIO, put on your CIO hat. So how do you evaluate this? There's all kinds of AI initiatives out there. Everyone's got an AI initiative. His company, that company, big companies, small companies, all kinds of things. So what metrics should a federal leader use to measure mission impact, to measure the impact of AI in their agency? Besides just speed, speed's one factor.
Yeah, I think you're pulling on a thread that is something that's been missing. And so when you have leaders asking their CIO what value are you getting out of this initiative? And we've seen it based upon the hype cycles with generative AI and now with agentic AI. There's grave concern there. Too often times, CIOs are starting with the technology in mind. So there was a time 12 to 24 months ago that business cases were not getting approved unless it had generative AI as part of that business case. And so they were taking this technology and applying it to every single problem under the sun, whether it was good or whether it was bad.
You got to change the oil in your car. Well, where's come on now.
Right? And so that's the issue that they were dealing with. And what leaders were missing was the fact that they need to start with the outcome in mind and the use cases, because AI has a multitude of different tools, from generative to agentic. We're now investing in quantum. There's neural network models to anomaly detection models and deterministic capabilities that are out there that all serve a purpose. And so if CIOs are going with a portfolio of tools and they're bringing that to the table, then they can align the use case and the outcome they're trying to generate to the tool that is going to help them generate that outcome. And so that is the place to start to be able to get a bigger return on the investment. So the biggest thing that they can focus on when you look at the return on the investment, what is around experience and bettering the engagement experience of the constituents that are being served. So setting the metrics around that constituent experience is the place that I would start to set significant metrics.
When federal leaders show up at 9 o'clock in the morning, there's no lack of problems they have to solve, especially with fraud. They have to worry about procurement risk. They have to about identity verification and program intake. It's a long, long list. One of my favorites is improper payments. Okay, so let's go back to the federal office. You walk down the street, you're talking to a CIO. So where do they start? They know there's improper payments. I start off with $1 billion a week. Companies do it and agencies do it, but where do you start?
Well, first and foremost, when you look at the fraud problem, depending upon who is evaluating, roughly 5% of all payments have some form of fraud, waste, or abuse that is part of that. So when you talk about billions of dollars, that 5% adds up really, really quickly. The best place to start is at the front door. So when you think about the distribution of a benefit, you can evaluate claims, and the common model has been we are so concerned about getting the benefit in the hands of those that are in need that when they identify fraud, the money is already spent, and the recoverability of that money lost from fraud is in the single-digit percentages. Mm-hmm. And so that what they referred to as a pay and chase model is completely ineffective. So you need to be thinking about the front door. You need to be starting with eligibility. And if you're making decisions at the time of eligibility and you're not allowing the fraudsters into the programs themselves, then you're actually preventing the money from going out the door, so your recovery on that is 100%. You also need to be, when it gets down to the distribution of benefits or the claims that are filed, do real-time analysis on that claim information such that you can prevent those claim payments or the benefits from being distributed themselves. So focusing further upstream in the overall operational process is going to be your best chance at success.
Pay and chase has got to be so frustrating because the horsey has left the barn. You can't find it. There is a new program, I think it's called the Death Database that the IRS has, where they just list people who are dead. And then before you issue a payment to John Gilroy, you find out if he is really alive anymore. Just these are some basic steps. But I think we could do a whole show on pay and chase and how impossible that is, especially for funds that leave the United States. So prevention is the most important thing I can see with this whole fraud prevention.
100%, and that's a simple example, right? And it starts with the data in different views of the data. So another place that organizations should focus on is just being able to integrate data and give their investigators and analysts the ability to see a wider set of data through different viewpoints. And, the example you used around, the death database, right? Or, those that are, imprisoned and shouldn't be receiving benefits that still do. Like, those are really simple examples of data integration that can really have a massive, massive benefit if used in an integrated way and proactively. Earlier this morning, you talked about Nevada. And here's a fun fact for you. A lot of hospice problems in Los Angeles, like a 500% increase in hospice problems. They got this publicity. So now there's a state where a lot of hospices are starting to locate. It is Nevada. 400% increase in hospices in Nevada. And so how can the federal government coordinate the federal states? I mean, another challenge, we didn't even mention this earlier about the whole idea of visibility and fraud. And this, we see it happening right here with the hospice people. Yeah, so when you look at the story of Nevada, which was a SNAP, supplemental nutrition use case and example that we talked about this morning, this is where the federal government is forcing partnership of the states to help them solve the problem. Too often times we're seeing federally funded but state-run programs. And if you're just spending money that's not necessarily yours, there's not the incentive to be able to be a good steward of that money. Yeah. And so this is a great example of where that partnership is making sure that the state is a good steward of the SNAP money by setting a threshold that if the state goes over the threshold of fraudulent or error-based SNAP payments, they're on the hook for making up that difference. And so that's forcing a really solid partnership in a very, very different conversation around that program than has been had in the past. And it's 6%. I mean, that's a tight standard, isn't it? It's a very tight standard in comparison to where some of the error rates stand today. So it's a significant issue that states at large are looking to address. Fraud, waste, and abuse. What a hot topic in Washington, D.C., and SAS could have some answers that you'd never expect. But the 50 years of working with so many different companies, I mean, I've seen it all. I'm going to say that, Stu. I've seen it all. Well, you sure have seen it all, haven't you guys? I think, unfortunately, John, when it comes to fraud, we've only seen a small sliver because I think the innovation that's out there and knowing the technologies that these criminal enterprises are using, we've got a lot more to see. The expectation is that 75% of individuals that we surveyed as part of this ACFE survey stated that they're seeing an increase in AI-driven fraud scams, and over half of them expect that to accelerate into the future. So, yeah, we have seen a lot. We've helped prevent a lot, but we're going to continue to see this, especially as programs become more and more digital and our adversaries can attack these programs from international geographies that are outside jurisdiction. Wow. Unfortunately, Stu, we're running out of time here. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Stu Bradley, Senior Vice President, Fraud, Risk, and Compliance Solutions at SAS.